Today is February 11th, and my name is Alexandra Mendoza, and I'm with Peter Mustardo to have a conversation about treatment practices in photograph conservation. This is part of a series of interviews I'm conducting to photograph conservators as part of my project for the Advanced Residency program. And I intend to describe the current status of treatment practices and also collect some opinions about certain treatment procedures that have been changing through history. I would like to follow a format for this interview in which I will begin asking you questions about yourself and your experience and the characteristics of the treatments you perform. Then I will address some specific treatment topics to end up with some questions about the future of the field in this. So I would like to start asking you, could you please tell me your name, your job affiliation, and your job title and affiliation?
Yes, my name is Peter Mustardo. My job title, I guess, is I sometimes use director. My accountant says I need to use president of the Better Image, which is our private conservation practice. I should say indeed. The Better Image is not our incorporated name, that is indeed Pro Photo International. Principally because the Better Image had already been incorporated in the state of New Jersey. So.
And for how long have you been with your studio? When was this started?
The business was started in 1991, January of 91. And here I have a little listing. It started in 1991 in Washington, D.C. Nora Kennedy and I established the business then. We moved to Pittstown, New Jersey in '93. Maintained the studio. We incorporated as Pro Photo International in 1997. And in 2001, moved to a new studio in Milford, New Jersey. And then in 2006, opened this studio in Manhattan. So that now we operate out of both New Jersey and New York City.
And Peter, could you describe me what the type of individuals or institutions comprise your clientele?
Yes. Since you gave me forewarning, I went to a database and came up with some numbers. I should have very nearby. Which is good. We have a database that we list all our clients and we break them down into various subsets. Excuse me. Which is good because I don't think I've done this for quite a while. But under, it's interesting spread. It's fairly uniform actually. Here I've got them broken down into archives, libraries, and historical societies. 5% of our clientele coming from these three groups. It's fairly small. Artists. We work with contemporary working artists, artist studios. 4% of our clients come from that. Then I have art services, which we mean auction houses, as well as private curators, people of that nature. 7%. Private corporations, and oftentimes they're curators or they're collection managers. 5%. Galleries, which we have indeed made somewhat of an effort to not pursue gallery work for various reasons. 7%. Estates, 3% of our clientele are estates. Dealers of photography, 2%. Just again, I think a factor of our direction for the business.
Yes.
Reason for these numbers. Government agency, 2%. Insurance companies, 3%. And museums, 5%. By far and away, the vast majority of our clients are private individuals and private collectors. That's 42%. These are numbers, as I say, which I don't have in the back of my mind until you asked the question. But it's interesting, I think, mostly private individuals or collectors, which
Thank you. That's a very complete answer. And So now to get started in our subject about treatment, I would like to begin this part asking you, how do you define treatment?
Treatment. Treatment is something that interacts with the actual photograph. Something that touches the surface, whatever it might be, is a treatment. You know, as opposed to a report perhaps, or a examination where you just give an opinion and you don't really have to intervene.
Intervention.
Yeah, an intervention, I would say.
And how do you determine the need for treatment?
Well, in our case, with clients, I made some notes actually. That's interesting because I think increasingly we get asked to do this by way of a JPEG image. Right? Someone sends us now from any state or country, right, this photograph, here's what it looks like, what will you do, what will it cost? And we've drawn a very tight line about refusing to do that. We just can't do it. So we established the need for treatment by looking at the photograph in person. And then ideally in conversation with the owner, client, to determine what they feel it needs and why, and what we feel can be done and how. And we've been, I think, very good. I think one of our strong points as a business is client interaction.
And although you have these very different clientele, in a general sense, do they expect more for you to, do they have like an initial idea that treatments can go?
Well, again, part of our talking with clients, we've gotten very good, I always say, at lowering expectations. Which I think is the best place to start. So I'm sure you know, there's not a lot often that can be done for photographs as opposed to perhaps for paintings or work of art on paper. The photographs don't really admit of a lot of restoration treatment, which is what a lot of clients, of course, desire. So we've learned best to lower expectations, and what we try to do.
And what is the aim of the treatments that you perform? In general sense.
Yeah, well, it's the aim, I guess, is to make a better image. No, I joke a little bit. No, I mean, it depends really. The aim is, I guess, to stabilize things, to keep them from, if they're in physical danger, from getting worse. Whether it's a tear progressing or cracks spreading or things of that nature. Quite honestly, in private practice, it also swings a lot on aesthetic reintegration. They want something to look better, which is only understandable. So there's aesthetic reintegration that's important. There's stabilization. Those are probably the main ones.
And could you describe, like in general sense, the scope of the treatments you perform and the types of photographs you treat more frequently?
Yes, I have some notes. I mean, the scope of the treatments we perform, run probably the gamut. I'm sure you know them. Surface clean, humidification and flattening, hair repair, consolidation of loose, flaking, damaged skeleton, in-painting of losses, rebuilding of lost, inserts of lost areas. We've been 18 years in private practice, so we've run the gamut from daguerreotypes to dissect prints, and almost everything in between. Obviously, most of the 20th century material is silver gelatin, but we've done the grain from salted paper prints to albumin prints to collodion prints to tin types, ambrotypes, daguerreotypes.
Yes, subjects.
The whole gamut, yeah.
And negatives? Do you treat negatives?
Don't treat them so much. I mean, we work with some. I mean, I guess we've treated them. We've got rolled, humidified, flattened, curled nitrate negatives. 35mm roll film. But in terms of other treatments, not really. Negatives in general go to duplication and things.
And do you do wet treatments like, I don't know, washing or bleaching, other type of chemical treatments?
We do very little wet treatments. very little. 18 years, I don't have a number of figures, but we really shy away from wet treatment. And certainly shy away from chemical treatment photographs. I think in the field, we're pretty much known as pretty conservative along those lines. There are plenty of others with a different slant who somehow, they might hesitate, but they sometimes don't hesitate for long. These processes of bleaching, redeveloping, refixing, intensification, things of that nature we have historically left for others, perhaps with more of a stomach for experimentation or risk-taking than we've been willing to do at the better image. So we really, I think the field, the market knows it out there, drawing a line about what we will and what we won't do. You know, not to say that washing or immersion baths or things are off limits. We have done some of them, but certainly not heavy chemical interactions, chemical treatment. So we're a bit too cautious for that.
And in order to understand better your methodology of work, could you describe to me, I don't know, with the photograph that came here, how did you approach the problem with treatment?
With a thorough examination. I mean, that's one thing, again, in private practice, it's sometimes hard to do, to put in the time to really examine closely, you know, wait, think about the project, you know, go back to it a week later and look at it again, talk with colleagues in the studio or outside the studio. Have you ever seen this? What do you think about this? You know, really to take the time and have the time to think thoroughly about a condition report and then a treatment proposal. You know, I think in the private field we are generally pretty slow moving, pretty deliberative. We put a lot of time and energy into the initial work, this treatment proposal that we develop, in consultation often with other colleagues and certainly with the client. We like to know, again, what they expect, what they can expect. We try to tell them the limits of the treatment. You know, we put a lot of time into the written paperwork. We have a pretty thorough graphic document that, once we're done, gets sent to the client for review. And I always say, this is something you can take to another conservator for a second opinion. You can sit on it for 2 months, it's okay, and consider it. You can, you know, take it to whom you want, but I've always prided ourselves on the quality of our paper. That's the initial approach, right? And that's, I think, very important to get that set up correctly. Which includes, of course, pricing your project sufficiently to somewhat recompense us for the time and effort that went into that initial paperwork, which is never really recompensed. But it also establishes, I think, our reputation somewhere in the continuum of the field, hopefully at a little higher end in terms of the care and thought we put into individual treatments. We don't, always tell colleagues and clients, we don't do 500 projects a year. We can't. You know, there's 3 of us, 4 of us maybe. You know, we want to do 50 projects. Ideally, we want to do 25 projects if we can get paid sufficiently to keep it all afloat. So that's where I'm, as we approach, that's how I approach treatment projects.
And after treatment, how do you evaluate your treatments?
That's a good question. It's difficult. I mean, we work in a little circle in private practice, you know. There's not a lot of people to call in and say, hey, what do you think? Should we go further with this? Should we stop here? The clients oftentimes are, you know, it's lovely to have a spot here in New York City where our New York clients, we can call and say, please come in and take a look at this. What do you feel? Do you want us to go further? Do you want us to stop? Are you happy with it as is? Or, you know, to have an interaction with them. To evaluate it, you know, oftentimes, historically, you know, you do a treatment, you send it off, and you hear nothing. Happy to get a check back from the client, which is nice. But always questions in my mind, you know, where do they go? Do they surface again? Some do after 10 or 15 years, various other venues, whether, you know, acquired by a museum or passed on to another collector or show up at auction. And we've got very good tracking device and our database, you know, we know what we've treated, and hopefully the paperwork follows the piece, so that over the years there's some continuity.
And have you had this opportunity to evaluate, I don't know, certain pieces over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen pieces, I know we've seen pieces that we've done years ago come back through somehow or other. No one, yes. You know, it's good, it's good. In general, I feel very good there. I mean, there's nothing that comes to mind right away that I can say, oh, this was a project that got that.
Thank you, Peter. I would like to ask you now, how do you define the extent of treatment? Like, how do you define a minor, major, or intermediate intervention?
Well, you know, I don't know what, I don't know that there are any very minor treatments. I mean, we have some clients call and say, oh, it's just, there's just a little accretion on my, you know, salted paper print. It's nothing, you know, it should take me 5 minutes. But I always say, well,
Yeah.
right, then why don't you help yourself? You know, I mean, there's very few things that I would consider minor that you have to touch the surface of a photograph. And all the more so when the values of these photographs are now, you know, easily into the 6-figure range. When a piece of art of that nature comes in, you know, no treatment is minor. And we go up from there. I mean, hinge removal. Sometimes, you know, we get a piece that's distorted a little bit from linen tape hinges or something, and it's just removing the hinges. And, you know, in the past, I remember a client who said, well, why, how in the world can it be so expensive to remove these hinges? I said, well, it's because we're doing them. You know, because we document it photographically before we do them. We write you up this condition report. I come to your office to pick up the piece. I take it back to my studio. You know, we spend time, we look at this, and we do it very carefully. So these hinges can come off very easily. It was a steep report. Said, you know, you could take them off like this, and they'll be gone. If you can live with the skin that you'll do. You know, very few things are minor.
What are you?
Hinge removal is not minor.
Okay.
You have to do it carefully, and then, you know, there may be cause to have to humidify and flatten it after. And if it's a ferro-type surface, the humidification and flattening, is you humidify too long, you get some disruption in the ferro-type surface, then what? You know, it all takes time and attention. So, I don't know if there are any minor treatments. You know, moderate treatments, the hinge removal, humidification, flattening, a lot of consolidation, edge consolidation, when the edges get chipped and flaked off. You know, that's in terms of the continuum, it's not those aren't major treatments. But still, you're putting something on the surface of the photograph that wasn't there before. In terms of major interventions, we have had a few recently that I would consider major. Again, I historically consider ourselves pretty conservative. But with this contemporary material, I'm drawn into kind of the new world of plastics and laminates and things of that nature. Where, again, I don't want to be, perhaps we will become known as the conservators who are doing this laminate removal. You know, thin plastic laminates, you know, which I would consider fairly major intervention. And we're doing more of those than I would have thought.
And do you consider like the creation and application of secondary housing as treatment?
No, I wrote in my notes.
Maybe.
No, not as treatment. I mean, it's an ancillary treatment, but it's not. Yeah, I guess it could be argued, but you know, I don't really. It's a presentation, often presentation. You know, we're photograph conservators. Not, you know, that's preventive, oftentimes preventive conservation. And it's wonderful, important stuff for sure. Right, I said they might have implications on the conservation, preservation of the photograph itself, but you know, I'm sure people could make the argument that some are indeed conservation treatments, but they're not here. I'm willing to debate them. Or discuss it, for sure.
Now I would like to hear your opinion about transformation. So in your observation of the work that you have done in these years that you're working, What are the changes that you perceive?
Yeah, notable, I'd say, notable changes in the field in general. In the maturity, not only of the conservation field, but of the photography, the art market, where they are, I think now, more than willing to live with certain signs of age and natural deterioration processes of photographs that they weren't perhaps 20, 25 years ago. You know, by which you make this distinction between damage and deterioration. I always say it's a bit like, yeah, you know, a broken arm, you have to mend, right? You have to fix. But gray hair, you can if you want to do something about it, but you're not going to fool anybody for too long. And, you know, if this is deterioration, I think there's a growing appreciation for the natural history of a piece, making it from the 1920s to 2009. When things show up without signs of deterioration or age, then I think now a lot more question marks are going off and people ask a lot more pointed questions, and why does this look like this, and why isn't there any silver mirroring on this Edward Weston print from 1920? So I think there's a, you know, a maturation in the field of conservation to avoid over-treatment, as well as in the market to question over-treatment, which I think is good. And then again, in the field of conservation, I mean, changes we've seen, I think, are less, perhaps a move towards minimal intervention. You know, there's less and less knee-jerk reactions about removing things from mounts because the mounts are brittle. There are other approaches to protecting against photographs from brittle mounts than removing them from original supports. I think a lot less, say, experimentation, falsification of chemical treatments. This intensification issue, I think, has died down, where in the mid-'80s it was flared up. Have any other notes? But I think in general, also the documentation. I think indeed the conservators, at least professional conservators working in the field, are much more inclined now to maintain fairly decent records of what they've done.
I think you've answered a couple of my next questions, which was if you perceive levels in the intervention, which is a yes.
Yeah, but indeed that they, I think, have.
And also if you consider that the perception of how a photograph should look in terms of its condition has changed. So I just wanted to...
Oops, I'm sorry, I answered all three at once.
Just to get that clear, if that were. And so now I would like to ask you about the work that's been done in other places, like in other types of private practice or in other institutions. How do you see the work done in these other institutions or private practice in relationship to yours?
I should not comment.
I don't want to comment on that.
No, I probably should. No, you know, we've from the start tried to maintain very high level of quality and approach to the field of conservation. Right? We have tried to do that, and I think we've succeeded to a great extent. You know, to be quite honest, I mean, it might be a factor of a number of things, not least of which is my dear partner, who we started this business, you know, Nora, who was, you know, very involved in the field and very big on education and, you know, promoting the cause of conservation. You know, wouldn't let me slip up, you know. We needed to do everything right by the book, which we did. You know, and the condition reports, the slow pace, the whole, which is good, which was actually suited my approach to the field as well. Some others, for a variety of reasons, whether historically or financial or nature, I'm not sure, but you know, some are not that deliberative or that slow. Again, I don't want to talk about other practices in the field. There aren't that many, so it gets a little tricky. Friends with them all. But in terms of the difference between us and institutions, there's clearly a difference. Because I see many institutional conservators and they have lovely jobs. You know, to work in a museum, it's great. They have more of the time on their hands to deliberate and to consult with colleagues and curators and to research and discuss. And if they're really lucky to have a science department that they can, call upon to do analytic testing and then call curators in to discuss this view versus that view. I mean, lovely, great. We're, on the contrary, or in opposition, we're on the front lines here. We have clients, our clients who are our lifeblood, need solutions. I mean, they oftentimes have deadlines. They oftentimes need something done, whatever. And they leave it essentially up to us, often trusting us to develop a proposal that will serve their purposes and respect the object and stand up over time. So oftentimes we are indeed pressed, despite how we might want to operate. We have a deadline on this piece going to auction, in 2 weeks, so it's got to get finished. And it would be nice perhaps to have another month to work on it. We're doing it.
And coming back to the market and to the auctions like you just mentioned, I would like to ask you, what's the influence of market in treatment? Maybe the value that you also...
Often, yes, it certainly has an influence. It often, in fact, drives treatment. What do we treat in general, but something that has often a market value? I mean, we do family photographs occasionally, things with sentimental value, but very few, very little. And again, that's a function of, as a business, trying to keep ourselves healthy and functioning. Since there are very few families that have the financial resources to pay for physical treatment of family photographs. Some do, but most don't. So the materials that come to us are oftentimes have a value assigned them by the market. And they come here for restoration in many respects. This conservation restoration is another interesting question that we can, I'm sure, talk about for a long time. Because we indeed call ourselves conservators, and not to the word has a much more positive connotation. But, I think I can admit on camera that a lot of the work that we do is indeed restorative. Scratch that exposes the paper base needs to be toned to mask the damage. I mean, not that it's a criminal enterprise, but, it's a restorative technique, not really conservation. You could put it in cold storage and that would conserve it. But a client who is perhaps have a monetary interest in that photograph wants it visually to look like it did, or at least approximately look like what it did.
Okay. The next question is about, is the first one about the topics, like specific treatment topics. And it's about the daguerreotype cleaning. And well, as you know, this is one of the earliest restoration treatment done on photographs, and it was done historically by photographers, dealers, curators, and then conservators, and it has changed considerably through time in materials and methodologies and in many ways. So I would like to ask you, what's your opinion about daguerreotype cleaning?
If my notes say, indeed it's true, we don't do it at the veteran. We've never done it for a client in the 18 years we've been in private practice. Not to say that it's sometimes can be warranted. In fact, we had a project that we subcontracted that out 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. Because indeed, at this point, there are people who have done the various cleaning processes, essentially electric cleaning, much more often than we have. And although I trust that we could teach ourselves and our staffs how to electro clean, at this point, I don't feel the need to get ourselves up to speed to start. I don't want to advertise that we would do that. And there's others with much more experience who I'm happy to subcontract the occasional daguerreotype that I would recommend be clean. I would send it all off to them. I understand that I've seen what it does, both positively and negatively. And, I'm not that keen on having bright, shiny daguerreotypes.
And In which instances would you recommend this? You said one of them.
Well, we had ones where we had a composite of over 200 16-plate portraits, all in a single frame. And they were all labeled, titled. It was the representatives of the state of Virginia, 1853, 58, something of that nature. And at least 6, 7 of the faces were completely obliterated with tarnish. These were small 16-plate circular images. And the client in private practice, private hands, it was purchased at auction by a politician who had it, displayed in his house, and was concerned that you couldn't see who these guys were. Indeed, you couldn't. They were completely tarnished over. So I said, well, indeed, this is arguable. These 5 or 7, I can't recall how many, you might want to have cleaned. But I said, but be aware when they come back and you replace them among their 195 compatriots, they're going to stand out like shiny new nickels. So I said, if you consider cleaning these 5, you might want to consider cleaning these 11 that are in similar, but not quite as bad condition, just to kind of modulate the whole thing. And to his credit, he only chose these 5, that was his decision. And we packed them up and sent them off to another conservator, which, I was happy about, but it was appropriate, I didn't want to electrically these scared. And indeed, they came back. Maybe three of the 5, 3 of the 7 had some exfoliation off the surface of the place, which was horrifying me. Somewhat didn't terribly horrify the conservator who we had subcontracted them to. It was just told, well, it happens sometimes with smaller plates. Oh, really? And the client, of course, didn't even notice. He was told. I said, well, there's exfoliation here. You've lost this bit of image. Oh, they were bright and shiny. They looked great. He was happy as could be. So I don't know where I'm going with this conversation other than, I'm not a proponent of cleaning daguerreotypes, except perhaps in the most severe cases.
Where the image is not readable.
Exactly. They're 150 years old, or 160 now. Let's let them show a bit of their natural age.
Thank you. And my next topic is about chemical intensification, and also these type of treatments are historically one of the first, or perhaps one after the third, I believe. And this significant research in the field has been done to study the viability of this treatment into prints and negatives. I would like to know your opinion about this treatment.
As I'm smiling because I'm hearing my wonderful friend Brad point out that all of this research has been done on throwaway prints, right? Which is as it should be. Experiment on those. I don't think anyone has gotten comfortable enough or confident enough or knowledgeable enough as far as the circles, professional circles I run in, that would make chemical intensification of historic prints a routine matter. I think a few times it's been tried, or whenever it's been tried, it's a pretty bold attempt. And sometimes perhaps successful, but again, it's a path that I'm not interested in pursuing. And we haven't, we don't intensify photographs, and I don't foresee that we will in the future. It's
And your decision is based in ethical issues,
yeah, I think in ethical issues, and my sense of propriety, the question that it throws into the field. Who knows what it looked like back then, or how far are you going to intensify it? And it seems more a falsification of an original than a reversion to an original state, if that makes any sense.
My next topic is about on-mounting and remounting photographs, and by this I also would like to talk about the assemblage of albums. I believe, well, I've read and known that, as you also said, photographs were more easily, let's say, dismounted back decades ago. So I would like to know now how do you feel about dismounting photographs? When would this be an appropriate treatment?
Yeah, I think when when the mount is physically endangering the photograph, right? By which I mean, not that a turn-of-the-century cabinet card is on a brittle mount, right? Which we hear oftentimes, or we did. People would say, "Oh, the mount's brittle. Should we remove it or de-acidify it?" Right? A lot of that kind of talk by people who aren't that aware of the nature of the photographs. So, a brittle mount is not sufficient reason to remove it from the mount. There's other ways to protect it. But when it's, for instance, when it's broken off already and has a piece of the photograph is unsupported right around the corner, you must have seen something like that. Then I would give consideration to removing it from this mount to secure the photograph, which is indeed the crux of the matter. That's what photograph conservation is about. The ancillary supports are interesting, can be important indeed, but when the photograph itself is endangered, then I would consider it. We had an issue years ago with a client, old client who came to us, called with an album that he wanted photographs, platinum prints, 90 platinum prints of Tibet. And they had to come off, it was an album format, right? And they had to come off the mounts. They had to come off the mounts. We said, well, we really want it. I've always said that it's there, you must see it, it's got help. So again, this is something, again, with Nora was much more involved in the operation of business back then, which was good, set us on the right path. The fellow made a special trip out to us in Kutztown, and this was years ago. And we were all thinking overnight, we were hoping that it was a situation where the mounts were endangering these lovely platinum prints. Whether it was bad mounted, and the adhesive was failing, and the prints were lifting, or something of this nature. Well, the person came with a lovely travel album from Tibet with 90 platinum prints that were in pristine condition in a beautiful, they were overall mounted on lovely, grade cardstock in a lovely album that had no physical reason to be disbound and removed from these mounts. And we got into a long back and forth conversation. This fellow had obviously a financial stake in removing these from this album structure and selling them one by one or whatever they had planned. But again, he had some moral high ground to at least defend. And he had his point too. He makes a living, and I think at some point it was mentioned that, well, if things had never been broken out of albums, half the things at the Met wouldn't be able to be put on the wall. A lot of things indeed historically come out of albums.
Hey Steve, how are you?
But we said, this is not for a conservator. You want these cut out of here, you want them, you can take them to a hack, basically. Take them to somebody who will do it. But you can't come to a conservation concern who is intent on conserving this object, which is really about it, and ask us to break it apart for you, for financial gain. No, that we can't. So again, there's plenty of people who do. I don't know what happened in this, but I suspect somebody got disbound and scattered, which is the way of the world, not the way we're supposed to go, right?
Thank you. My next topic is about modern and contemporary photography. And as we can see, larger formats and newer materials, not only photographic but laminates, face-mounted photographs have challenged the field.
Yeah.
So I would like to hear your opinion about these materials in terms of treatment.
What's the point?
Experience
Fix it right.
It's a learning experience. I mean, that's the last
If I was that
10,
smart, I
15
would've
years. I
gotten
don't
out
know,
of
but
this,
recent wave of contemporary materials. It's been great. It's been exciting. They're not only bigger, colorful, there's new materials, they're,
I love doing it, but
the
it's so hard.
artists are often alive and working, which is kind of
being
nice to
off-site
be able
is
to talk
also
with
just
the
completely
contemporary artists.
to anything. My life is disappear.
And, quite honestly, you can edit this out for the public, but, they're worth $1 million, at times.
Wherever they
They're
could find,
sudden
2 feet of
photographs
desk
are
space for us, we were, so.
the contemporary art sales.
Mhm.
You know, it's changed, I think, the field of photo conservation considerably. It changed the art market
We'll
of
expect to
photography
check,
considerably.
and I just didn't, you know, we're here
And
so
then it's exciting. I mean, it's
frequently, I thought, geez, you
somewhat
know,
a
we
pain
better
in
be
the
in
neck
touch just
in
in
some
case
respects,
they're
but you know, it's exciting to have something other than an 11 by
That's what
14
I
inch
like.
black and white photograph to have to deal with. And there are a lot of them. The world now
okay,
is
that's quite all right.
pumping out these
All right, well,
contemporary.
we'll let you know as
Color
we move
photographs.
along and where we're at. and
Have
all
you
that
faced
stuff.
any circumstances in which you couldn't treat these photographs because they were severely damaged?
Okay,
or
that's
because they
fine.
were-
Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah, in particular, I mean, this, you know, these surface mounted, with dissect surface mounted photographs, we were just getting comfortable and with buffing out deep scratches and, you know, trying to do something physically to repair physical damage on these things. When a year or so ago, we had a face-mounted colored photograph come to us with a scratch along the surface, but it was in a matte surface acrylic, you know, used to scatter light so that you don't have this reflection, which meant the new technique that we had just developed for buffing out scratches no longer applied. You know, it wouldn't work on this matte surface acrylic. So that kind of, we were stymied.
Mhm.
And, you know, we thought, and we worked with a research scientist at the Met, who was there about casting resins and making fills and reproducing the surface texture on this resin fill. And we tried UV curing of the resin, we tried this and we tried that. And, you know, ultimately, we realized this is not a job for a private conservator, this is research really for institutional work, which I think is still going on, but as it should be. But that, you know, stymied us in terms of physical treatment of contemporary materials. And I'm sure there's new things out there that will break upon us. Three-dimensional photography, you know, constructs. We've seen some things of that nature which get into waters.
And I would like to hear your opinion. There's sometimes, and you that are in contact with artists as well. What is your feeling about reprinting a photograph when it's severely damaged? What is your opinion about it?
Yes, it's interesting. It's a big topic. We often recommend if, for a client brings to us a badly damaged contemporary photograph, we don't hesitate to say, if indeed you can get a reprint of this made through the artist or the representative gallery, go, please, get it. You'll be much happier than what we can do in terms of repairing a punctured photograph or a scratched or torn. Please do. That's our first recommendation. You know, it's often not possible with the change of diminution and demise of various materials. You know, when ilfochrome stops making silver dyed bleach, then how are you going to repair a damaged? How are you going to reprint a damaged Louise Lawler or whomever was using that process, other than by substituting either a straight chromogenic print or a digital inkjet print, which might be the way things will go in 20 years. Maybe no one will care, but they should, because they should. But that's because of failure of having the original materials available to reprint. There's other issues with reprinting damaged photographs that I have perhaps more of a problem with, one of which I encountered today. Asked me to review a photograph from an artist before purchase, and my comments, essentially on physical condition, whether it would need any treatment work after they purchased it. And I went and looked at this photograph, which was in beautiful, beautiful, pristine, unbelievable condition, dated 1977, which was figured 32 years old. Beautiful. Artist signature and date. Artist signature and date on the back, 1977. So it made me wonder, I don't know any thing, certainly any person, but anything that's 32 years old that doesn't have some sign of age.
Mhm.
And this is the kind of differentiation, with improvements in forensics and in this identification initiatives that are out there, which will help.
Mhm.
But visually, what do you do? It's not going to differentiate with a black light on it. If it's made in 77 or it's made in 97.
Mhm.
But what you do is the old-fashioned, inquire of the representative gallery, when was this printed?
Mhm.
And to my surprise, without a hesitation, 2002. Why isn't it dated 2002? Thoughts? The way they are. But that kind of reprinting, I think, throws things way out of way out of and will have implications in the market.
Mhm.
Profoundly.
And the knowledge of the artist's work.
Will change, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So, I mean, reprinting doesn't have to be covered.
Mhm. We've come to the final part of our interview,
Yes.
and then it's about treatment
Yes.
experience and training.
Yes.
I would like to know if you consider that treatment proficiency is central to the competencies of a photograph conservator.
Well, that was on the list, and that's because, I don't know, I would say it's beneficial,
Should be.
not to name names. Well, I mean, I'll name myself. I mean, I'm doing a lot less treatment
Mhm.
than I was doing 10 years ago.
Uh-huh.
I presume 10 years from now, I would hope I'm doing a lot less than I'm doing now.
Yes, what
Does
did
that
we do? We addressed the contract?
disqualify
or
me?
your,
Am I moving out of the title of photograph
Right.
conservator because I do less treatment? I
Oh,
hope
but
so.
then we emailed you,
Rhetorical What about some of our grand masters in the
Yeah.
field? Some of whom I would hesitate to
Ah.
give a treatment project to, although I would still think we could call them photograph conservators or administrators or educators. But I think the important thing is to have had experience treating photographs, to know how they respond to what's, as it is, I think having experience in making photographs,
Mhm.
which I think is going to be a big
We'll
issue
really try to
20,
do the right
30,
thing.
60 years down the line. When they're no longer people who
We'll
have the
try.
experience of printing a photograph or feeling the gelatin soil and knowing what it reacts.
I'll really try, I'm sure, I can't guarantee, but we'll really try.
I think treatment proficiency is central. Yeah, it's important. I mean, you need to know
Thank you,
to really
Steve. Bye-bye.
have a feel, physical, tactile sensation for how it feels to treat a photograph. And probably the whole range of photographs.
Mhm.
Unless the field specializes into 20th, 19th century case image photographer conservators and silver gelatin conservators and dissect and gene check people. But I think it's important to have hands-on experience.
And how do you think we gain proficiency, treatment proficiency?
Exposure, time, time. It all accrues over time.
Mhm.
It's hard to get in a conservation program in 3 years.
Mhm.
It's hard to get in a 6-month internship, but you're fortunate that you have exposure to these materials and the ability to treat, both for compliance, but also before that in an experimental mode where you have things that you can push the envelope a little bit and see what it feels like when it's too wet or when it swells, or to have that ability, to have that experience, I think all adds to treatment companies.
Thank you. And to finish my interview, I would like to ask you, in terms of treatment, what do you consider are the major challenges that the field faces?
Well, knowledge of new materials, the new materials that we're seeking.
Mhm.
principally plastics, but also the ancient materials, which may or may not be our domain, but it's another question. I've got the challenges of understanding the new materials, the challenges of gaining and building reliably published information, published information that will stand the test of time and build up a body of knowledge. The advances made really in the last 10, 20 years have been great.
Mhm.
They've been great. This last meeting in Tucson, the quality of those presentations, I think makes everybody, or should make all of the old timers really proud
Mhm.
to see how far it's come. Because believe me, we were all stumbling in the dark 20, 30 years ago. And now with these initiatives of the Barita coding, the textures, the surface characterization techniques, the sampling, the IT, that's all great. That'll all push the field forward tremendously and give us some quantifiable information to go by. Physical knowledge of the working properties of all processes encountered. And then this other major challenge, which I think we touched on briefly, was this, I think, which needs to be made, a distinguishing between photographs and pictures.
Mhm.
Not every picture is a photograph, which is hard to comprehend when it looks like a photograph. Looks photographic, maybe based on the photograph, but in my estimation,
Mhm.
it's not a photograph. It's art on paper, it's inkjet material. That might be art on a prepared paper, a substrate that has connotations of photography, whether it's a Barita-coated substrate. But we've started to get this crossover, this strange thing where things come to us which professionals have thought were photographs to deal with, and they're not. And they don't react like photographs, and we're not comfortable, and we don't want to treat this picture, this image. And this is, again, from professionals who one would think might know better, but and that's only, I think, going to increase. Soon it's all going to be pushed together in a big ball, and if it looks like a picture, if it's a photograph, if it's an image of something photographic, it's a photograph, don't tell me otherwise. And I think it's behooves us in the field to make sure if you're going to treat something like that, that you know what it is and you're pretty comfortable with how it's going to react. Otherwise people will be in trouble. It will be similar to somebody trying to clean a Garrafect with a washcloth, right? If you don't know what you've got, chances are you're going to likely make some errors. So,
Now that you've gone to this slide, do you have a definition for a photograph?
Well, I think I haven't thought this out enough to put film, but I think it has to have some component of having at one point in its life been light sensitive person. That's a critical issue. That's what I get out of my printer here. Looks like a photograph. Cool 99% of the people in summertime, but I think that's, again, the short answer. I think this light sensitivity in chemical development is critical as well.
Thank you very much, Peter. I really appreciate your time and your interest.
No,